Good morning. As always, so good to be with you. I want you to open your Bibles with me at this time to John chapter 4. John chapter 4 is where we are this morning, and we are looking at an incredible story beginning in verse 43. So open your Bibles there, read along with me, and then when I'm finished reading, leave them open, and we're going to follow along throughout the remainder of our time through this story. After the 2 days, Jesus departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you, so you plural, see signs and wonders, you will not believe." And the official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. A marathon, as we all know, I think, is 26 miles. 26 miles long. It's a 26-mile race. And it's been said that a marathon is actually a 6-mile race with a 20-mile warm-up. That's what runners say. The last 6 miles, the last 10K are really the hardest part. Because at that 6-mile mark, when you're getting towards the end, that's when a runner finally hits the wall. Right? The struggle is real in the sense that, yes, it is physical. You've just been running for 20 miles, right? There's a physical struggle. But there's like a real internal struggle, an internal wall that a runner hits at that point, you know? I want to be really honest with you. I've never run a marathon before. I'm not insane, right? I'm not crazy. But if you talk to runners, and if you talk to people who do run marathons, this is what they'll always say. The hardest part in the race is the final 6. I think that's a great picture of how life often feels. We get to these places where we hit a wall, right? We've been going for some time, and we feel like we've been warming up, you know, we've been getting where we felt like we wanted to go, but finally in life, we reach these places, these points in life where we hit this wall, and we think to ourselves, and maybe we even are bold enough to say it to somebody else. We say, "I don't know if I can keep going. Right? I don't know if I have it in me. Right? I'm just too tired at this point. I have nothing left. Right? I hit a wall." Guys, today we're looking at a man who, in a way, literally runs 2 marathons. From the place he comes from, the round trip is about the distance of 2 marathons. But these 2 physical versions of a marathon are meant to really exemplify his life. You see, he's finally hit that wall that I'm talking about. His world is falling apart. And maybe you've been there before. Maybe you've been there before where your world was actually falling apart, right? Maybe you're there this morning where you feel like your world is falling apart in some way. And I'm here to tell you that this guy's picture, John includes this story of this man for us so that we would see an example of his life and the example of his hitting of that wall, his world falling apart, is meant to be this picture for us as well. Because what we see in this man is a man who walks by faith and not by sight. He walks by faith and not by sight. And so I want us just to take this story of this man, and we're going to take it in two chunks. And the first section is really, we're looking at him walking by faith to Jesus. And the second part is where his faith actually becomes sight, where his faith actually becomes sight. And so the first thing that I want us to look at is this question and that I want to pose to you that we see in the example of this man. And that question is this: what does it take for you to finally go to Jesus in faith? What will it take for you to finally go to Jesus in faith? The short answer to that, at least what we see in this story, and I think what we all know is true in our lives, is the answer to that question is desperation. Desperation. In verse 43, we begin this section here in John, and the story is set up in this really interesting way because what you'll notice is Jesus has been with the Samaritans for 2 days. If you were here with us last week, we looked at the Samaritan story. He's been with them for 2 days, and here the implication is on the third day, he goes to Cana in Galilee, and we're about to see a miracle. We're about to see resurrection. And this pattern's already been set up for us in the Gospel of John. We saw it in the beginning of chapter 2, that on the third day, Jesus goes to Cana, and he performs this sign, this miracle, that signifies this new life, right? So throughout John's Gospel, we're going to see this. 2 days, on the third day, resurrection comes. On the second 2 days, third day, resurrection comes. And it's all setting up the very end of our Gospel. What all of us know as Christians is that Jesus is going to be crucified, and on the third day, there will be resurrection. There'll be new life. So we have verse 43 kind of setting up like, okay, what's going to happen here after this second day? What's going to happen on the third day? But interestingly, we have this comment in verse 44, which says, John records that Jesus says that a prophet is not welcomed in his hometown. Right? No prophet is acceptable in his hometown, is the idea. So he says that in verse 44, but then in verse 45, it's interesting because it says when he got to Galilee, which is where he set out to begin in the first, or to land in the first place at the beginning of chapter 4, when he gets there, which is the region of his hometown, they welcome him. So John is saying a prophet is not acceptable in his hometown, but then when Jesus gets to his homeland, they're welcoming him. Which makes you wonder, did John not really understand what Jesus was saying? No, not at all. John is actually telling us something significant. John is showing us why the Galileans are welcoming Jesus. Why are they welcoming him? They're not welcoming him in the same way the Samaritans do. At the end of the story that we saw last week in verse 40 through 42, we see the Samaritans welcoming Jesus, and what do they say? They say, you are the Savior of the world. You're the Messiah. They have come to believe and accept who Jesus is, right? They truly welcome him for who he is. But here, that's not exactly what's really going on. We are told in verse 45 that the reason they're welcoming him is that they were down in Jerusalem at the feast and they've seen Jesus doing all these incredible things. They remember the water turned wine in Cana. They remember what he was doing down in Jerusalem. And we don't know all the things that Jesus was doing down in Jerusalem, but we know that he was doing something that was piquing their interest to where they were like, we like this guy. We want him to be around. Good things are happening when you're around Jesus. And so they welcome him. See, what the Galileans saw in Jesus, though, was not who he truly was, but who they wanted him to be. Who they wanted him to be. If they saw who he truly was, maybe they wouldn't be so quick to welcome him. Right? And so I think this is really setting us up with this sort of diagnostic question that each one of us, before we even get to this man here who's about to approach Jesus, we're supposed to begin to think a little bit about, okay, how do I welcome Jesus? Why do I welcome Jesus? What is it that I think Jesus is? What is it that I'm after? With that thought in your head, hopefully, verse 46, the story picks up, and Jesus comes back to the place in Cana where he turned water into wine, and the news that he was back in this region had spread all the way down to Capernaum, which is about 26 miles away, the distance of a marathon. And in that town of Capernaum, right, there is an official whose son is ill. Right? This man's identity that he's an official is quickly usurped by the fact that he's a dad. Right? He's an official, but man, this guy's a dad. And that's really his identity in this story. And what happens in verse 47, if you look there? When he heard that Jesus was in the area, he went to Jesus. The original language actually is adding this idea of he immediately. It's like he's at home next to his son who's sick in bed, and all of a sudden people are like, hey, Jesus is in the area, and he immediately gets up is the idea, and he goes to Jesus. He goes on that marathon journey. All right, this is a long walk, you guys. I did the math for you. This would be like you walking from here this morning to Victoria Gardens in Rancho Cucamonga for lunch. Right? You'd probably get there by dinner, I would imagine, maybe. You'd have to stay the night. I don't know how you're going to make it in one fell swoop, right? This is a long ways this man goes. He's going to climb 1,300 plus foot elevation in order to get there. This is not a cakewalk, right? But he's in a bad situation, a really bad situation. What happens? What does he do? When he comes to Jesus, what does he say? And notice his language. What does he go? He asked Jesus, verse 47, to come down and heal my son, for he was at the point of death. This word child is a diminutive word here. It's basically the guy is saying something like this. He's saying, come down before my dear little one dies. My dear little one dies. This dad is in agony. He's kind of begging is really what this is communicating here. And what good parent wouldn't be doing the very same thing, right? Right, this guy, though, we can't miss this. He is an official. And this idea that he's an official would be referring to someone who actually serves royalty. He's serving a king. Most likely this would be him serving Herod Antipas, who was the Roman governor in that region at the time. And so it's important to picture this man. He's not only a father, but look at him. What is he like? Well, he's an officer, right? And so he is an important man. He has influence. He knows people. He has a network, right? He can get things done. But he's also very affluent. This man would have had a lot of money. He would have had a lot of resources that he could use to get the things done that he wants to get done. But look at him. What's he doing? He's come to a place in his life where he is so desperate, where his position and his money, his network isn't going to accomplish what he hopes to accomplish. All right, this is the place of desperation. When all that you have, all the people you know, your money runs out, nothing can fix the problem that you're under. It's then and only then that we are desperate. Isn't that right? Don't we tend to go to all the other resources first? But it's when finally those run dry that we go, man, I got no other place to go. And so what does he do? He goes to Jesus. And what's his response to his desperation? It's really interesting. It tells you in verse 48 that Jesus is essentially turning to everyone who's welcoming him, right? All these people are welcoming him. In verse 48, what does it say? He goes, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. It's kind of a weird response to his question to come down and heal my son. Unless all of you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. He's using this official as an example of a wider spread problem in this region. He's saying to the people of his homeland, you're all seeking me because I do stuff for you. You like me being around because I can kind of fix some of your problems or something like that. I do stuff. And it's only as long as I do these miracles that you're going to keep coming to me. Now, gratefully, the man doesn't respond to Jesus with sort of this prideful arrogance. You know what? I don't need this. He's making an example out of me, right? I'm in a desperate situation. I'm asking you for help, and you're just going to call out some wider spread problem. I don't need this. That's not what he does. What does he do? He doubles down. But look at what he says. Sir, please come down, right? Sir, come down before my child dies. He has no idea who Jesus is. And we know this because he's politely calling him sir. Right? Sir, right? Please come down. He's not coming to Jesus to worship him as the Messiah. Right? He sees him as like, I don't know, Gandalf or, Miracle Max from Princess Bride or something. I don't know like how he views Jesus at this point, but all he knows is that Jesus does miracles. Right? He can fix things that other people can't fix, that money can't buy. And so he wants something from Jesus. This man is solely interested in the well-being of his child, and he thinks Jesus is the only person that can help me. I mean, doesn't it feel horrible in life to be used by other people? right? I mean, maybe you have, I think everyone at some point has somebody in their life where you don't ever hear from them, and then when they call you, it's always because they want something, right? And so you see their phone number pop up on your, cell device or whatever, and I sound like I'm really old saying that, but, on your phone. And what do you think? They probably want something. You know what I'm talking about? If you don't have anybody like that in your life, maybe that's you. I don't know, right? I mean, we all have people that we think this way about, don't we? Right? Someone only calls when they need something. We do this with prayer requests, even with God. We use up all our resources, and then finally, the things that we actually pray about to God are often things we're like, well, I've run out of options, God. And so we come calling, right? This man was in a hopeless situation, to say the least, and he desperately needed someone to fix it. So he trusts Jesus in the most difficult circumstance. What about you? Where are you at? Where are you going? Are you desperate? Are you desperate in your work? I got this boss I can't stand. It's as simple as that. I got bills I can't pay, and they're piling up. Now I'm so lonely. All right, maybe you're desperate because your child has walked away from the faith and is living in a way that breaks your heart. And you just have no control over it, right? Maybe you're finally to a desperate place in your sexual desire. You have no legitimate outlet. The person you want is a non-believer. Or maybe the person you want is same sex as you are. Right? Or maybe you want to be married so badly and it just hasn't come. You're desperate. Or maybe for some of you it is a health condition, or to make it worse, it's the health condition of someone else that you love. Then it's getting worse. Or maybe it's not physical, it's emotional, and this last year has just felt like a marathon of sadness, of loss. Whether it's loss of a job, loss of a loved one, this loss of a sense of stability or a rhythm, or a loss of a friend. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just my kids won't listen to me. My marriage is like caving in, right? I'm just at this place where I don't know how else to fix it, right? What will it take for you to finally go to Jesus? Desperation. It's in those moments where maybe you'll finally go, when he's your only hope. And what I love about Jesus is that even with all of those mixed motives that we can have in going to him, he doesn't see us on the phone and just send it to voicemail, right? He doesn't do that. What I love about Jesus is, even though we go to him with mixed motivations, not grasping often who he really is, not necessarily going to him just because we want him, just because we want to be with him, but because we want something from him, he's so kind and gracious and still receives us to care for us. And that's exactly what we see in this story. But Jesus' care for this man goes far greater than what he thinks his real need is. So secondly, the second part of our story leads us to this question: what does it take to finally make it home? What does it take to finally go home? To finally make it all the way there, where our faith turns into sight? Well, the short answer of that is believing that Jesus' word is enough. It's believing that Jesus' word is enough. This man has a brilliant story, and it's a brilliant story for us that pictures our faith on our eternal journey home, our ultimate journey home. Look at what happens in verse 50. After the man doubles down, Jesus says to him, what? Go, your son will live. Literally, your son lives, is what Jesus says. Right? This is not a good response. This is not what this man was hoping for, is it? This is a terrible test, because what has he said all along? Please come with me. Look at it. Come down and heal. Come down before my child dies. And Jesus says, go, I ain't coming with you. Right? This is not what he asked for. Not at all. Jesus gave him only one thing for his journey home, and that was his word. That was it. See, all this guy's probably ever known about miracle workers is that the miracle worker has to be there to perform the miracle. It doesn't work otherwise. You look at even amazing miracle workers from the Old Testament, most famously Elijah and Elisha. Think of Elijah and how he raises a boy to life who's dead, right? He had to be there. Right? This is how this works. But do you see what's happening here? Jesus is making a claim that must have just been absolutely astounding. He's saying to the man, I'm not going with you because I don't have to. I don't have to. I can heal with a word. With a word. Do you realize how God-like that is? Right? I mean, we say things like, I want there to be a house. Be a house, right? Let there be a house, and there's no house, right? We got to go build the house. Some of you would love this if you're going to say, let there be dinner, right? And there was dinner. No, we got to go and cook it, don't we? I would prefer to say, let the dinner be cleaned up, afterwards. But no, we got to clean it up still, right? This is not how it works. But with God, he says, let there be light, and there's light, right? He says, apple tree, there's apple tree. Right? He says, your son lives, and your son lives. See, Jesus is claiming that he is not a sir. He's not a sir. He's the Son of the Most High God. I'm not another miracle worker. I'm not a vending machine. I'm not here to dish out just some solutions to your problems. I'm the creator. Remember John 1? He's from the beginning. He is the creator who creates with his word. What does John say? He is the word made flesh. So of course I can heal with a word. Do you see what's happening here? Jesus is speaking in verse 48 to the crowds and saying, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And the man says, sir, come down, I will believe. And Jesus goes, all right, if you're going to believe, then go without seeing. Go without seeing. Believe without seeing. Jesus is saying in verse 50, I want you to trust me. I'm not going with you. I'm not going with you, but trust me. He lives. Will you trust me? Will you trust me? Right, this is how faith works, isn't it? Isn't this how faith works? I mean, have you ever experienced something like this with Jesus before? Where you've asked him specifically for things, you've prayed, and it feels like he answers half of your question? You know what I'm saying? Because God says, come down and heal my son. And he goes, I'm not going with you, but I'll heal. I mean, maybe you're like, I love for you, Jesus, to change my circumstance so that I could have peace. And Jesus says, how about I give you peace in the midst of your circumstances? And you're like, well, that's not exactly what I asked for. Right? Or you say, Jesus, give me purpose by giving me this job that I love and it's really well paying and all that kind of stuff. And Jesus, how about I give you eternal purpose in the midst of the job that you don't love that much? Right? Jesus, would you change my kids? And he's like, I'll get to them, but how about I change you first? And you're like, well, I want you to change them, right? Well, this is exactly what this man is experiencing, sort of a half response. But what does the man do? He looks at Jesus and he did what we just sang about. I will take you at your word. And he started his second marathon home. And what does he have to do? Not just believe that Jesus can do it. He's got to believe Jesus. He's got to believe Jesus. The man believed without seeing. What does it say, verse 50? He believed the word Jesus spoke to him, and he went away. He went away. That's faith. That's faith. Do you think this man walked home with high spirits, just saying, I'm claiming this promise? He's going to do it. I know it. Do you think that's how he walked home? For 26 miles, do you think that's how he walked home? I don't know. I imagine he was a little bit scared, maybe. You're leaving the miracle worker behind, right? Maybe he's a little bit scared, but it doesn't matter. It didn't matter how he felt. It mattered who he trusted. And that's how faith works. right? I mean, we've seen all these things in the news with planes, right? I know people are like nervous to fly right now. I'm always nervous to fly, okay, to be honest with you. I think about this all the time. If you want to get on a plane, my daughter just flew in last night from D.C. She's home, she's safe, right? I was nervous on her flight home, this kind of idea. But do you know how faith works in a plane? Like, you can get on a plane and you could be so confident. You're like, I'm not scared it's going to crash, right? It's going to be fine. And you could sit there and you can watch your movies and you can relax the whole time. And the person next to you can be like terrified the entire flight, just thinking it's going to crash, that sort of idea. But what happens when you both get to your destination and walk off the plane and you're both fine? You both realize where the strength of your faith lies. It's not in how you feel about the plane. It's the fact of the plane being a strong object of faith. What got you home is the object, not how you felt about it, right? This is how faith works. The outcome doesn't lie in the strength of our faith, but the quality of the object of our faith. And so, how much faith do I need? How much faith do I need? Just enough to step onto the plane, right? You just got to be able to get on it. Right? How much faith does this guy need? Just enough to go home. That's all he needs. Just enough to turn from Jesus and say, all right, and just take one step in front of the other. I love Joe Novenson, and I have this quote like taped to my computer, but he said this once. He said, the feel of faith is not strength but dependent weakness. What faith feels like is not you going, no, I believe it, I have no doubts, right? That sort of idea. He says what faith really feels like is weakness, but you saying, I'm depending on you, Jesus. I'm depending on you, Jesus. Guys, this is the Christian life. This is the journey with Jesus. This is why Paul writes, for we walk by faith and not by sight. Right? Believing his word is enough. This is the Christian life. And so when we get to the end of John's gospel, we have this powerful interaction of Jesus who had died on a cross, was buried in a tomb, and all of a sudden people are saying he's been resurrected from the dead, he's alive, and there is a disciple named Thomas, famously, we call him Doubting Thomas, poor guy, right? But Doubting Thomas, who says, I will not believe that Jesus is risen from the dead unless I see his wounds, and I could put my hands in his nail holes. And so Jesus so kindly appears to him and says, Thomas, come here. Do you see? And he believes. And what does Jesus say? Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. You can believe without seeing because Jesus' word is true. Right? The Christian life is a life of faith headed home, but one day, you guys, our faith will be turned to sight. We sing about this famously in that hymn, It Is Well With My Soul, written by Horatio Spafford, who went through lots of places in life where he was desperate. In that last verse, what does he sing? Lord, haste the day where my faith shall be sight. Right, where the things that I've been walking and trusting the word, I will see it made sight. Our ultimate finish line is heaven. And this guy's finish line, though, was in verse 51. It was in verse 51, and what did he find when he got home? Verse 51, he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. The official discovers that Jesus has been faithful, but he has some questions. He asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. And the father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. Your son will live. I like to imagine this guy coming home for that final stretch, coming over that last hill around the bend of that marathon he's been on. And in that home stretch, the servants are running out, they're cheering him on, I don't know. And they're telling him, your son is alive. Your son is alive. And the official discovers that his son was healed at that very moment that he spoke. He asked the people, do you remember when the fever left him? Well, about when was that? And they're like, it was like 1 o'clock, right? And he thinks back, he's like, that's exactly when Jesus said that word. Do you guys believe in coincidences? You believe in that? Have you ever had timing work out in such a way where there was no coincidence? I have a lot of examples of that. I mean, my story of even coming to this church, I'd say, is that. I mean, I've told it to so many of you. I don't know if I've told it publicly before, but in 2018, we were asked to come here and be the pastor of this church, and just through a lot of things, to keep the story short, we just felt like God had not released us from our ministry in Oregon and planting this church at Oregon State, and so we said, no, we can't come. We wanted to. We couldn't come. And that was hard, and we thought we moved on. And in 2022, in January 2022, my wife informed me that Pathway was looking for a pastor again. And we go, oh, that's interesting. Weird. And then just through the course of the week, we were like, well, yeah, why did we say no again? Oh, yeah, that was why. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Why do we feel so drawn to this place? We've never been, we never lived, this church we've never even worshiped in. Oh, that's weird, right? By the end of the week, we were like, this is dumb. And so we prayed, Lord, these desires are not helpful. Please take them away. Like, we got good work to do here. This is where we're supposed to be. And we ended that prayer like a good Christian would, but whatever your will is, that's what we want, Lord. So we prayed. I went on with my life. The next week, I go meet with a guy to talk about church planting in Portland, Oregon. And I sit down with him for coffee. His name's Clay. I said, Clay, how are you doing? And he said to me, it's been weird. There was this church in California that reached out to me about being their next pastor. And I said, oh, what church is that? He said, oh, you wouldn't know it. Some church called Pathway in Redlands, California. And I got really nervous. And I said, Clay, you'd be perfect. You should totally do it. You should totally do it. I got nervous, and he probably would have done great. And you know what he said to me? He said, no, I already told him no. But I would love to help them. Like, I just want to recommend somebody. And I've been praying about that, and God keeps bringing your name to my mind. And we didn't talk about church planting after that, right? I left, I called my wife, terrified, because I felt like I knew what was happening. I wish I could have said, oh, that was just a coincidence, right? And sure, that's a significant one, that's a big one. You know, there's a lot of small ones too, aren't there? So many. I've heard so many stories. I have many in my own life. Do you think this guy thought it was coincidence? Think he thought it was coincidence? Verse 53, what happened? He knew Jesus didn't blow him off. He knew Jesus didn't blow him off. The Father knew that was the hour. Your son will live. And so he himself believed. He believed. This passage is said that this man believed twice. He believed when he left Jesus that day, and then he believed again when he got home. This is the same thing that happened with the Samaritans. They heard the woman's testimony, and they believed. And they spent 2 days with Jesus, and then it says what? And then they believed. All right, do you see what's happening here? This is showing you how faith works. This is showing you how belief in God works. We believe, and then we walk by faith, not by sight, and then we have these moments where we believe again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, until the day that our faith is turned to sight. Until the day that we believe, right? See, some of you are probably living off belief from years ago. You went through something in your life and you believed, and you're still living off of that, thinking that that's the Christian life. Oh, I believed 20 years ago when I gave my life to Christ. No. Walking with Jesus in faith is a life of belief. There's more to be had today. There's more of him to know. There's more of him to trust. There's still steps to take. There's a life to experience with Christ today, not just 2 weeks ago. This is how belief works. It grows. And it's in believing and trusting day after day after day, relying on Jesus' word. That is what finally gets us home. That's what finally gets us home to the day when full and final healing comes. When full and final healing comes. Because if there's one question we might have about a story like this, is why is it that God heals sometimes and not other times? Why is it that he heals this son here and not other times? Well, that's because what is the point of healing when all of us at some point are going to die? Right? No one's lived forever in this world. We all die. But I tell you what, God always heals. He always heals. He either will heal you today, or he will heal you on that day when you finally get home. That day of resurrection. And that day's coming because Jesus' mission is a resurrection mission. I want to read you a quote from Andrew Wilson in closing, where he says this. He goes, "On that day, the trumpet sounds, the dead are raised, the twinkling of an eye never to perish again. Corrupted bodies become incorruptible. Sickness and affliction will never again befall them. The sterile smell of the operating room corridor is no more. Elderly people formerly bound to hospital rooms are given a new life and a new youth that will never be stolen by the march of time. Every deaf ear is unblocked. Every damaged limb is repaired. Every blind eye sees. Schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease are swallowed up in victory, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death. Nobody cries on that day except with a cry of joy." This is my favorite part right here. God never says no to a request for healing. He either says yes or not yet. And we all live with examples of both. And so we see our greatest hope in verse 54, that this is again a sign pointing to Jesus, to who he truly is. Jesus, then, here is the ultimate son of the ultimate royal official, God the Father, the King, over all of heaven and earth. And this eternal Father loves his beloved Son, Jesus. And yet Jesus is the one who comes down into this world and goes to the depths and carries our sickness. He carries our infirmity. He carries our death into the grave in order to bury it there. Yes, God always heals. Sometimes he says yes, and sometimes he says not yet, but resurrection is coming. On that day, when our faith will turn to sight. At the finish line, when you finally make it home. When we get home, you will see with everyone else who's believed in Jesus that he has been faithful. And so, guys, our invitation this morning is to once again trust him by faith. It's to trust him by faith and to continue to trust his word day by day by day until we get home. I'd love for our worship team to come up at this time as we go into a time of response. And as they do that, I would love it if you would just take a few moments here. And I want to give you a moment just to be quiet. I want you to bow your heads with me. And I want you to sincerely consider this question. Where are you desperate this morning? Where are you desperate this morning? If you know where you're desperate this morning, then you know exactly where Jesus is asking you to trust him today. Where is he asking you to trust him today?